Um, my name is Suzanna Hopwood. I'm a 65-year-old woman with a trans history. And how I relate to the study is that I'm interested in the topic because I've had experience of both directly encountering the care system, providing support to other LGBT and trans people. My experience in that was very interesting. I was working as a volunteer, as it were, for a project in London called Opening Doors, which you have heard of. And I was, allocated a couple of trans people to visit, and they were in care situations for various reasons. One person really required some very specific residential care. Another person was living by herself in sheltered accommodation. So that's how I relate to the study, really. I don't have a felt interest in terms of being in the care system, but it obviously is part of the realm in which I, as an older woman, and who happens also to have a trans history, but that's a subsidiary point, really. But relate ultimately, has to see myself in the context of potentially wanting care, either domiciliary care or residential care. God forbid. God forbid on both counts, really. But at the moment, I'm reasonably self-sufficient, and I live with my wife, and we have a reasonably active life, and can manage to continue without any kind of serious engagement with any care situation. So, that's the situation at the moment. I think it's very important because, for two reasons, really, two basic principal reasons. First of all, because the cohort of older LGBT people is increasing. That's the overarching thing. And secondly, the proportion of that cohort, I would surmise, will increasingly be accommodated either with domiciliary care, as the cohort ages, and an increasing proportion will go into residential care. One here, excuse me. So it's really important that the right messages go out, really, long term, about how people, LGBTQ plus people in general, are treated in the care system, either domiciliary or residential, and how gender diverse people are treated in that system. Because, as you know, there is there's real problems about the discrimination, particularly around trans women, and trans people, non-binary people in general. So this study, I hope, well, I'm sure it will, help to raise awareness and more detailed consciousness, if you like, about the issues, about the delivery of that care in those two environments. Because as you may know, have picked up, I'm sort of involved through Opening Doors in the Pride in Care project, and have been involved in that from the very beginning, assisting with the development of the model, but then also doing some evaluation and so on. So I and the reviewing of certain one or two projects which they looked at. So that's very, it just evidences how important this area is. And about, God, how long ago was this? About 5, 6, 7 years ago, when I got involved earlier with opening doors. I believe Stonewall had done a report on domiciliary care and the care of older LGBT people, and that was interesting. And this whole area has to be taken forward and for the reasons I've just described, because we're talking about issues of human rights, equity equity of treatment under the law, equity of treatment within the context of the care system, one's rights as a citizen, and there is, from my point of view, those rights are indissoluble under the law. I will repeat what I often say, which is that up to the age of 65, I was functioning as a middle class professional man. After that time, I became I sort of transitioned as a middle class professional woman, trans woman, and there is no difference in the way in which I perceive I should be treated under the law, or nor my entitlement to treatment. So these things are very important, and I see a straight line between those general issues, general principles, if you like, and the way in which the care system should operate for LGBT people in later life, whenever they need to act. Well, I mean, we're talking about older people post 55, post 50, 55, but I mean the same principles occur if younger people have to go in and be dependent on the care system. But I think the LOASCA study does not actually look below that age level. But we're talking about the same as general issues, how some people are treated, really, and the issues that come out of that, what we need to be doing in order to ensure that the right frameworks, if you like, both theoretical care, training, delivery frameworks are in place to facilitate what I've just described in terms of the access to rights and delivery of rights and so on. Well, hopefully it will lead to qualitative improvements in the way they experience delivery of care. I mean, it's as simple as that, it seems to me. When I'll just give you an example. When I did the two things for opening doors in relation to supporting trans women, the first woman was very severely, quite seriously disabled. She was in a care home, and she had never fully transitioned. She'd never had surgery. I think she'd had some sort of hormones, but it was very, it wasn't complete. She'd never completed a medical transition, and at some point, for some reason, she'd had a stroke, so she was quite severely disabled, and it meant that she needed a lot of support, which I'm pleased to say in the care home from the staff. She got that support. I mean, she wasn't a very articulate individual, if I have to say so, which is no reflection on her, but given her experience and background. But she, to my mind, the care staff, and particularly the care manager who was supporting her in the home, did not miss a beat, frankly, in the way they treated her, which was exemplary in my view. I'm not able to go beyond that and think, well, what about the other staff and so on. There were issues, I think, which she mentioned in as far as she could articulate, because her diction was, because she'd had the stroke, and that was quite difficult for her to articulate. And frankly, she wasn't most, well, I mean, it sounds patronizing, but she wasn't, the sharpest person in terms of perception and articulation. And but I got the impression that there were issues that she'd faced in the home about, judgments and so on, which, one's heard before, about the way in which trans people are, if they're out in a situation, or well, LGBT, gay people and lesbians generally in home. So if they are out, they can sort of risk that sort of discriminatory treatment, phobic treatment, and so on. I can't put my finger on it, but frankly, I think she felt that she there were some points at which she didn't really, she experienced phobic behavior really, and that made her a bit isolated. So that was the first person. The second person was living in sheltered accommodation, and frankly, she was living in fear, in my view, to the point that after we'd had an initial conversation about, how I could support her and so on, she decided that I couldn't, because for some reason, which I have to say is not entirely complimentary to me, she felt that I was, I didn't, quotes, pass, close quotes. Well, this is, some time ago. We're talking several years ago now, which I didn't think was terribly complimentary, but if that was her view. But I think it reflected the fact that she was deeply fearful about being outed in the sheltered accommodation environment she was living in. And I think that just tells you something, doesn't it, really, about the way people older. She was an older, but not a particularly older person, but I mean, she was an older person. I suppose she was in her mid-60s. How they've experienced life and so on, and how confident they feel to express themselves. Well, it's a shelter situation, so she wasn't getting direct care, but nevertheless, she was living in a sort of sheltered environment where presumably there are aspects of which she felt uncomfortable were she to be outed. And I might say she wasn't, she, in terms of passing, she didn't particularly pass very well herself, in my humble opinion. But we don't go there really, and certainly I don't make any judgments about that to anyone else. But I'm just making the point that she was in a particular situation where she felt that well, essentially she was living in fear, really. Which is not a way to live one's life, particularly if, I think it wasn't entirely clear to me about her, but I think she said she had breast cancer or something. She'd been diagnosed with breast cancer or something. I didn't obviously go into that because I didn't know her long enough. But it just seemed to me that she was, in quite a difficult place. And I don't know whether she was getting proper care for her breast cancer or whether she'd been properly diagnosed or whatever, what level it was. But, it was a pretty grievous situation, really, as far as I can perceive it, that somebody is totally isolated and, can't really respond to anything that reaches out to her, because she's making judgments about not just, those other people, but, there we are. So those were two experiences which kind of reinforced for me the importance of having care environments and domiciliary and residential care environments, which are affirmative and supportive, non-judgmental, non-phobic, and all the rest. And that's one of the reasons why I got involved in the Pride and Care project. Because it was a great opportunity. It built on the model of Pride in Practice, which you probably heard about. and opening doors seized upon the pride and practice model and said, well, we can do something around pride and care. And I said, absolutely right. You can. And we made some progress on that. I mean, I think it's come to it's a bit in the doldrums at the moment because there have been staff changes and so on. But anyway, that's something which I deem to be very important, and that's why the study is important, because we have to generalize in terms of specifics about what's actually going on, and hopefully from the study we'll produce some really definitive material which will both raise the profile of this issue, because for the reasons I referred to previously about the size of the cohort and the growth of the cohort, and as more people want come out, but also in the context of the moment. I mean, there is a bit of, I won't call it a backlash, there's a rather disgusting sort of environment which from gender crits and so on, gender crits, if you like, gender critical people and so on, particularly for trans people. And also a degree of hostility, I think, which is starting to wash over into gay women and gay men in, potentially in care situations. And certainly that's, from my experience, that kind of discriminatory behavior has been experienced by them too. So, we just have to, and it's not helped really by the way in which the, personally, the government and certain political commentators from particular perspectives are addressing themselves to these issues. And when I say addressing, I use the term advisedly because, frankly, I think from the point of view of what a lot of these people are coming at, is that it was a matter of don't confuse me with the facts. It's all driven by prejudice and so on. So. But I'm sure you'll know quite a lot about that. What have I liked? I mean, that's forgive my smile. I suppose. I mean, I was invited to sort of participate on the advisory group, and what I like about it, first of all, are the fact, the way in which it's shaping up. The essence of the project. That's what I like about it. I particularly like that. It's addressing, it has the potential to address the issues which I've, described. The second aspect to it, which I like, is that it's being driven by a very professional team, I think. I have some knowledge of, projects of this kind. And I think what I've seen from the people who are running it, people in your colleagues, I think they are exemplary, frankly, in the way they approach the work, the conceptualization of the issues, the response to the questions that are raised by the advisory committee, and so on. So I think that's what that's the second thing I like about it. The third thing is really the quality of the advisory group. They are pretty good, I think. They're diverse, and they make measured and, in my view, careful what shall I say? I'm looking for the right and left. They make sort of not expert, but very considered, obviously experience contributions which are rooted in their professional experience and sympathy and empathy for the issues. And I think all that's together with those three things, it adds up to quite a powerful sort of framework, which is good to be involved in. And I have every hope on the basis of what I've experienced so far that we're going to come up with the meat and potatoes, as it were, some very good, kind of come up with some good stuff. Obviously, that's to be seen, and it depends upon what happens in the pilot projects and so on. But you know, I think it'll. I know I have every hope for it to produce some really top quality outcomes, frankly, deliverables as we might call them. So that's why I particularly like about being involved in the project. I mean, it's early days yet, but you know what I'm seeing kind of gives me a lot of comfort that this is worth doing, and that, you know, frankly, I'm listened to if I say something. You know, people are assiduous in responding and picking up what you say and listening to it. I mean, they might not agree, but I mean, you know, when I have said things, you know, they've been, which is not very much, I must say, then, you know, they have been heard and responded to, and they might not be specifically addressed. But, you know, I get the right sort of acknowledgement, if you like. And I observe that with the way in which inputs from the other members of the advisory group are sort of treated. There's not an imperiousness about the team delivering this, you know, because I'd be the first one to respond negatively to imperiousness and sort of preciousness on the part of researchers, because, you know, frankly, that sort of stuff gets rather up my nose when I experience it, and there's no need for it. And in this case, I haven't experienced it, and I don't expect I will. So in this project, so that's a summary of my likes. Well, I look forward to seeing the deliverables, you know, to seeing what is produced and reviewing that, and then deciding, you know, how to use those how to operationalize the findings, to use the outcomes as consciousness raising, to access policymakers, and just basically start to influence more broadly than it is at the moment, because the whole area is a bit of a niche, I think, despite some of the work that some people have done, is a kind of niche area, and it has to, in my view, it is mainstream. You know, this is one of the threads. I mean, if you talk, we can't marginalize LGBTQ plus people. They're within the, you know, they're in the realm. I mean, they're not to be. You wouldn't say that, you know, we got to treat people from minority ethnic groups, people of color, in a different way in the care system. We all come at the care system from different ways and different experiences, and so on. And basically, it is incumbent, in my view, on the way the care system works, really, to acknowledge that and you know, and understand it and recognise it, and not think that, you know, we've got to talk about, you know, differential approaches and individual projects for these people. We're, you know, this is if you like, it's like the income maintenance system, and what else can I think about? The education system. It's delivered in a universal way, and I think care for older people in general, it must be a universal service, and which encompasses within the universality, the interests of LGBTQ plus people, and as well as, you know, other groups such as, you know, disabled people and ethnicities and so on. You have to understand that, and we're not talking about special treatment. We're saying this is a universal service, and it has to understand how it facilitates delivery of service, in this case care, to those particular groups. I mean, we're not saying you've got to have a, you know, one size fits all, but it has to be an acknowledgement, you know, that people are coming at this in a different way. They may have different needs, but the reality is, you know, they are to be treated as part of the mainstream delivery of care, in my view. We don't want to start marginalising LGBTQ people, and we don't want to start marginalising any other group, on the assumption that, there's them and us, really, because there isn't really. I don't consider myself to be part of a marginalised group. I know who I am, and I've had the benefit of looking at it from both sides, if you like, as a sort of mainstream middle class male, and now as a mainstream middle class woman who happens to have transitioned. Simple as that, really.
I'm Martin Wells. I'm 68 years of age, and I'm a gay man. I'm in a relationship with another gay man. However, he is an Asian Muslim. And the very fact I can't say to you his name signifies something which is going on culturally and in society. So my circumstances, I believe, because of my age and where I'm at as a gay man, etc., is getting much closer to what I might be calling upon soon as social services. And my mom, who's still alive, my dad died in 1978. My mom, she's 91. She's got very bad dementia, Alzheimer's. She doesn't recognize who we are. She's very physically fit. She unfortunately has had mental health issues all her life. And me and my siblings have found it very difficult to get social services to accept she's got two different kinds of conditions here. Now, whether that's because of various funding issues, because if it's a mental problem, she is supported with funding from the system, whereas if it's normal other problems, we have to pay for that, which is fine. We've been paying that. So I'm getting closer to that kind of thing. I think this study is so important, not because of just the study, but the way Birmingham University and the researchers have approached it. This is what's excited me about the study, because it's not just, I've seen so many academic papers about, I've got prostate cancer as well. I've seen so many papers about being gay man and prostate cancer, and this is our research and blah, 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 blah. Now, from an outsider's point of view, I've seen these papers just like gathering dust. It's like, okay, you've had some money for this, you've done some research, great for your professorship, great for your department, but where do I get the benefit of that? Yeah, there might be long-term benefit, but what I really like about this study is it's about experts by experience, as it were, coming on board and having an input, right? Obviously, something has to get started in a robust way. And then I and others have been brought in to say, hey, you as a person who might be calling upon these services, and I've got some experience by expert experience, how can you color this? What could we do with this study to make it even more effective? And yes, certain academic criteria have to be met. And the thing that excites me is it's not just that. The way I believe this study will help LOASCA, lesbian, older, etc. People in social services, or it'll help almost, if it's doing its job well, it probably won't get noticed because everything will work and everything will be done. It's like, now I've got a particular kind of autistic brain. So if I'm at the cinema or I'm in a restaurant or something, Oh, look at that multimedia script. Oh, hey, look, hey, they've not recognized us yet. And we've been here for 5 minutes. They've not actually said, oh, we'll be with you in a few minutes. Good customer service kind of doesn't get noticed. It's a feeling which comes with good customer service, but most people kind of don't notice it. A bad customer service probably gets really well noticed. It's like, hey, we've been standing here now for 10 minutes and nothing's happened, and what? And excuse me, I put this down on my form and no one's responded to it. And who do I talk to? I never know who to talk to. So if it's a frustration, it's bad customer service. If it's everything was fine and I kind of didn't notice it, that's the impact. And in a strange kind of way, that's probably a difficulty with the study, because you kind of have to go in and disturb it to measure it, you know, to measure the impact. So I hope that answers the question. A key word which comes up for me about being involved in the project is congruency. I've been so well looked after. So for instance, if I'm on a Zoom call, if a Zoom call's coming up, what normally happens in other areas is 2 weeks before a Zoom, oh, here's an invite for your Zoom call. And then about half an hour before the Zoom call's supposed to, it's like, where's the email with that Zoom call ID? I don't know where it's gone. What was it? Where is it? And I can't find it. The way I'm looked after is a day before the Zoom call, I get an email to say, don't forget, we've got the Zoom call tomorrow, very sweetly. And like an hour before, just in case you've not managed to, and it's like, I like how I'm getting looked after. And isn't that the congruency of the whole project? Because if it wasn't, it's like, I'm sorry, this just doesn't feel right. This is just like a talking shop. Oh, this is what we should be doing. No, this is what we are doing. That's what really connects me. One thing, well, more than one, but one thing I'm really looking forward to, and I've spoken to a few people in the project about this. I've got a school report in my first year at secondary school. This is 1966. And the history teacher has written in the comments, I really like what Martin does. He brings me things and I'm learning from it. Now, and that is my passion, that is. And what I'm really looking forward to is being involved with the academic stuff, which has to be done very robustly and has to, you know, have an audit trail, and it has to meet certain criteria, and the university and the department, you know, has to get kudos from that. I understand that. But the bit that really excites me is, how can we translate that into something really, really useful for non-academics, for other people who are really, really busy? And it's like, oh, here's a 50-page report. It's on paragraph 7. What it's like, I ain't got time for reading that, but I've translated that into something I can really use well. That's what I'm really looking forward to.
Okay, so I suppose the first thing to say is I'm a lesbian. I turned 60 this year. So that made me kind of pause, stop, think about aging, the future, where things might go for me. I've also worked in social care for nearly 30 years. So I suppose for me, the project brings together some stuff that's kind of directly relevant for me, you know, professionally and personally, really. So yeah, that's what I'd say to that. So I think just in and of itself, anyone wanting to research into the issue of older LGBT people and our experience of social care is really important. Just people thinking, we need to have a look at this. We need to look at what's going on for older people in our community, and what are their experiences of social care, and meeting older LGBT people listening to them, listening to their experiences about what is it like being on the receiving end of assessments, and then social care services. I mean, that's absolutely crucial in terms of us taking a look at what is and isn't working really right now out there. So just that in and of itself would be really useful. For me also, I think the fact that it focuses on the assessment process is particularly important, because assessments are crucial. Assessments are where everything starts. Good support, person-centered support, all of that starts with a good assessment. Theoretically, everything should then flow from that. So at the point of assessment, LGBT people need to feel that they're safe, that they can be open, they can be out, they can be their whole selves. And if they do need support about any aspect of their life connected to their sexual orientation or their gender identity, presentation, then the right space needs to be created so that they can talk openly about what they might need, you know, what's important to them. And that space, that safe space, you know, needs to be created by both, for me anyway, the tools and processes of an organisation uses around assessment, and also the skills, knowledge and approach of the people undertaking the assessments. So, you know, if things aren't right at that point, right at the beginning, then that will really impact upon the provision going forward, and ultimately, you know, people's experiences, and ultimately, you know, the outcomes for those people that are being supported. And I think it's really important that the study has a number of different elements, you know, interviewing social workers and social care professionals, looking at the kind of structures and processes that an organisation has, you know, and obviously talking to older LGBT people themselves and listening to them. So I think they're some of the reasons why I think it's really important. So I've had some experience of older people's services, although it was quite some time ago. My observations then, and I'm going to imagine, I'm pretty certain from other people I've talked to in the field, I imagine that things haven't really changed a great deal in the last, say, 15 years, 10, 15 years. My observations were that it were, you know, those environments for older people were extremely heteronormative environments, and very strongly gender conforming. So, you know, as a lesbian working in those kind of settings and kind of picking up on this, it really struck me and made me think a lot about, would this be okay for me? You know, would this be okay for me if I fast forward 20 years, 30 years, and you know, this is me here receiving these kinds of services in these kinds of settings, being delivered in this kind of way, in this kind of culture, if you like, and that was a really scary thought for me at the time. And I know that lots of LGBT people, as they get older, will have genuine concerns and anxieties about how they'll be treated, how they'll be supported if they need care services. So for me, if the study can shed some light on the situation currently for people receiving services or assessments, and then can provide a kind of a picture of what's out there, what's happening, what are people's experiences, which will then in turn provide a focus point for organisations to, you know, really think about their own culture and their own systems, and the kind of outcomes that are being delivered to older LGBT people. You know, that can only be a good thing, in my opinion. Yeah. So obviously, from everything I've just said, you know, I really believe in the importance of the project. So just that in itself means it's really great to be part of something that I think is that important and that's happening. You know, I've met some really interesting and experienced people from different kinds of backgrounds, but we're all sharing, if not experience of, then an interest in the subject, which is great. And I haven't had experience of a formal research project before, so that's been really interesting, just to be aware of, you know, and think about how that process is unfolding and the kind of process that it is. So yeah, that's been really interesting for me as well. All of it really. I think, like I said, all those separate elements that go up to, you know, go together to make the whole of the study, I think are really interesting, and I'm really interested to see all the outcomes from all those different strands. I mean, in particular, I think I'm really curious about the interviews with the social care, social work professionals, and some of the research we're doing in terms of organisational systems and processes. I mean, partly because I think it's really interesting for me to think about my own organisation, which is a large social care provider, and thinking about how we might compare, or, you know, what lessons there might be for us to learn. So yeah, or, you know, just all aspects of it really. I think it's all really exciting and interesting, and I'm really curious about where it's going to take us and what the outcomes are going to be at the end. So yeah, just kind of, it's quite exciting really, all of it.
Yes, so I identify as a cisgendered gay man. My personal history, I'm married to a man. I have 2 grown-up sons. And I suppose I became interested in the study through some voluntary work that I do with an organisation in London, which looks out for the needs of older LGBTQ people, with the intention of combating social isolation, really, in care, in their communities generally, really, I suppose. I have some awareness also from my professional background as a healthcare professional and then an academic within that field. So an awareness of health and social care needs of patients in general, I would say. And also personal experience more recently of having parents who both received care in different situations, one in a home with dementia and the other one at home supported with terminal cancer. So I have that sort of more recent personal experience for both my parents too. But I think this is important really because it begins to identify some of the care needs of the LGBTQ community, which is as a minority group really. I think, you know, that's important really to feed through into professional training, education, and also provision of services to begin to feed through to there. And the management of services, and also the application, I suppose, for resourcing those services. If we don't know what the needs are, we can't ask for money, services to address those needs. So I think it's quite important really just to kind of raise the profile. I think we've become more aware of the needs of other groups, other minority groups, perhaps, well, gender not being a minority group, but perhaps ethnicity and race. And we've started to address those needs more in care. But I think LGBTQ communities' needs haven't really been thought of that widely, really, in terms of care generally, healthcare perhaps, and also within the community as well. I think that the LGBTQ community doesn't really have a great awareness of the older end of that community, and of the needs. Perhaps they're not so visible, as you'd say, out on the scene, in bars and spaces, gay spaces, LGBTQ spaces, where people tend to congregate so they can be with friends and be with like-minded people. And perhaps those people aren't seen so much in those community areas. So I think there's some lack of awareness, I would say, within the community, which tends to focus on the younger end of the spectrum. Yeah, I think the most important way that it will begin to help, and this is something that I've become I've increasingly begun to think about as I've got older, is that it will help them to continue to live authentic lives if they were in receipt of care or if they needed to go into care. I think a concern quite commonly for older people is that they would have to in some way give up the lives that they've built for themselves and come to know, and may have to, as we say, go back into the closet, and not be able to see their friends or relate to their friends or family or other carers that they've known in the same way if they're in a public space, which seems quite strange to them. So I think really it's important to help support that. I mean, one of the things that I think about is that LGBTQ people don't have opportunity really to be completely spontaneous in a public space. They're always going to have to be aware of what's happening around them. Is this a safe space? Is there a risk in showing affection to my partner or to my friends? You know, we feel quite safe in our specific LGBTQ spaces, but outside of that, sometimes there's a sense of vulnerability. And I wonder if going into a care setting, there would be a return of that sense of vulnerability, and so spontaneity would cease, and everything would have to be considered. I guess on top of that, then as we become older, our mental faculties may not be so acute. As I said, I had an experience with a parent with dementia. And so behaviours may change, and that can be worrying if we feel vulnerable when we fully in control of our mental capacity. What might the situation be when we're not? I mean, I think that's the case for lots of people with dementia, but as an LGBTQ person in, if you like, a straight world, a straight environment, I think that would be a concern. I think ultimately what it's about then is the benefit would be in supporting person-centred care, really. And so what we're trying to do is find out more about the type of people that this care needs to support and what their needs are, what their hopes are, their fears, the requirements of care for this particular minority group. And I think this is really important to take this work further on and begin to more fully understand what those needs are, because they also vary quite widely, I would suspect, and would suggest really across the LGBTQ community, because we're not a homogenous group. You know, we are individuals who identify very differently across that community. So it's quite a complex field, and I think this will begin to kind of address and look into that. And I think finally the benefit will be that in producing results from this research, it will help individuals, LGBTQ individuals, their families, their friends, their carers, to begin to feel more confident, perhaps, about care services and the care system generally, and to perhaps engage with them in a more confident way. So what I've enjoyed about this project particularly is what I'd say is it's developmental for me. And I think that as a retired person, when you leave your work behind, and I'm retired now for 2 years, your world shrinks hugely because you suddenly lose all those professional discussions, conversations, networks, which you were a big part of your life for, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And suddenly they disappear. And the way that you're valued also changes because you're not seen in that professional light anymore. So I think for me, being part of this project, it's allowed me to draw on some of my professional experience from my past, both in terms of professional practice and then teaching, and then my research degree, So it's allowed me to utilize some of those skills and kind of dust them off in a way, and feel part of something again, as a useful contributor as well as a co-contributor, not a recipient of the research perhaps, although I may be in time, but at the moment I'm hopefully contributing something useful to it. So for me, the opportunity is very much kind of developmental. And I think the needs of people who are older, retired, the idea that they could possibly still be useful and developing and learning and contributing to lots of areas in society generally, I think, you know, there's a tendency to think, oh, well, that's it now. It's a kind of, you're done with your useful contribution now. Maybe it's time for you just to kind of quieten down and, you know, kind of, yeah, retire fully, which I don't feel ready to do that yet. Also, the other thing that's been helpful then, so it's very much developmental, but also it's been very supportive experience. So I think, you know, we're getting really useful help and information and guidance in this process. And also the opportunities to network with other people who are like-minded, but from quite diverse backgrounds. So we're all bringing different experiences, different understandings to the groups and the research. And I found that really interesting and nice to meet a number of people of my age and older, I guess, and younger, all bringing different life experiences and talking about different things in different ways. That's been really helpful and informative, really. So a learning experience too. Yeah. So in terms of the project, I suppose at the moment, looking forward to following this through to completion and seeing how the project develops over time, and how we can contribute to each phase of that. And I think we do feel, I certainly feel like we have been supported to feel fully engaged in each part of the research process. So I'm looking forward to getting on with the interviews, carrying out the interviews, looking at some of the data and helping to consider that and contribute to the findings. And then also really the dissemination of these findings, I think is quite exciting. So there are opportunities to disseminate this within academic fields, but also into practice and into the kind of professional practice and management of care services, see how these contributions can be disseminated. And also, I think it's quite also important, and I'd be very interested to see how we can disseminate this through to the LGBTQ community, so that they, as a community at large, become more aware of the needs of older people, and that this starts to maybe be put on the map and talked about more openly on social media and through the LGBTQ media generally, as part of our lives, that lives don't just suddenly end when you're no longer part of a kind of going out, clubbing, socializing, visiting bars type group. I see that, you know, there are, I've just had my local community paper. I live in London, and I see that there is now an advert in there for an LGBTQ housing scheme for elderly retired people. So that's now in the main kind of local community press, which comes out, which of course everybody sees. So it's raising that profile locally within my community as well, which I think is important, and it gives me more confidence and hope for the future.